Hello everyone. The title of today's episode is titled An Odyssey of Aeons. And so Mr. Within wants to take the uncommon position of wondering that if all the human beings right now are considering to be temporary, what if we were eternal? What if? I am saying that. And when I say what if, that means we're just wondering about it. Just like how Aristotle says it's the sign of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. Similarly, we are wondering. That's the power of wonder. It doesn't accept or deny, it watches. A temporary being, it makes sense. Because the being is temporary, survival is its purpose. But if you were an eternal being, what would be the purpose of survival? And I find that what occurred on the surface of our planet is that back in the day, certain human beings, they realized the futility and how small the place of the human being is in accordance to cosmic structure. That means we are a very tiny part of the cosmos. As a kind of tiny part of the cosmos, we have to identify with the big. And we can say the concept of temporality is smaller in scale than the concept of an eternity. Now, here's the thing. Why should an eternal being survive? It's very easy to understand why to comprehend why a temporary being should survive. But if we are all those people in Abrahamic religions, if the soul behind your eyes is the secret of the unknown creator, certain people have thought that in some sense, if you are something and attempt to look for it outside of yourself, that leads to chaos and disharmony. It's as if you're looking for a plate, but a plate is already in your hand and you just don't see what's in your hand, so you're endlessly looking for something that you already have. In a metaphysical sense, enlightenment is the idea that you're looking for something you already are. This is why they call it self-realization. Self-realization means there was something going on here, and you're realizing it. You're realizing what you are beyond how certain limited series of your actions define you. If I ask you you're a good person and a bad person, primarily what occurs is you wonder about experiences that could be ascribed to be good and ascribed to be bad, right? So we can say, of course, the free will of the mind is like you don't just have a free will to pick up a cup of coffee and drink it. You also have free will to choose to call this cup, a cup. You have the free will of subjective imposition. It's the love of loss and it's the loss of love. Right now we are on the loss of love side of the coin. We are in the shadow of the moon, not even realizing the light of the sun. Many human beings have opened their eyes. They have looked at a landscape that they can know. They have looked at each moment and realized you can zoom endlessly in and zoom endlessly out. And eventually at the extremes of each edge, whether you zoom in or zoom out, it is empty. So do you believe what I'm saying? I'm saying that we are human beings, we are the Homo sapien, we're living in an advanced civilization, we have developed not only internal technology such as language, but external technologies, and soon we will live on Mars and become an interstellar civilization. These are beautiful dreams, yet there is something about a dream that is not convincing. An Odyssey of Aeons is a journey of an awareness to the eternal and the temporal, to stillness and movement, to silence and noise. I want to share the story of a man named Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj. This man was a very poor cigarette salesman in India. But he was humble and he lived a simple life. And he kind of lived in there's some people who socially they're non-existent based on their status and class. It doesn't matter how well the person is. It's just literally the position they're born. It's like, you know how we look at the kind of old school Indian caste system. So it's not just in India. Many societies and social structures and tribal dynamics have simply evolved into hierarchies. These hierarchies represent the various abilities and their outcomes and how they appear. So anyways, Rumi says, "Let the waters settle, and you shall see the moon and the stars mirrored in your being." What that means is, if you stop doing the wrong thing, you probably will see the right thing. And if the right thing is leading to the wrong thing, then the right thing is no longer the right thing. We are kind of bursts of awareness upon this world. Nisargadatta Maharaj, this humble, simple living cigarette man, your salesman. A friend of him takes him to this enlightened guru, and the enlightened guru sees the guy and they have the traditional courtesies. And then the enlightened guru looks at Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj and gives them one word of true kind of advice. And he tells Sri Nisargadatta this one sentence, and he says, "Study yourself in every moment of your life." And so Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj kind of gets a blessing from this guy and blesses the guy, I don't know, certain traditional manners. And eventually he goes back. And then something unique happens in his life. It was as if that was a divine intervention just by the meeting of that guru. Now what happens is that guru leaves Mahasamadhis. That means he leaves his body. That means he dies. And so Sri Nisargadatta only met his guru once. But that one moment was enough to direct his attention. He starts in every moment, his lunch break, any moment he has, studying the stuff, studying the self, kind of wondering how the moment is the moment, how is the moment of being the moment, you know? And so eventually he realizes the true nature of phenomena. He realizes in some sense how the mind is actually oscillating beyond chaos and order. The reason you have an ordered sense of self in society, because you can consider what is chaotic and avoid it. Do you see what I mean? That means your mind is already being both chaos and order. You're just choosing which crossroad to walk on. And so Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj has this quote where he says, "When I see that I am nothing," just check this out, it's an incredible quote. He says, "When I see that I am nothing, that is wisdom. When I see I am everything, that is love. And in between, my life moves." So pretty much we can say that it is an observed idea. It's like not only the concept of eternity is observed, but the fact that if we were an eternal being and we're constantly in some cycle of playing the game over and over again, in some sense an eternal being requiring to survive is a kind of illusion. So one can say human life is how the soul is dreaming from another non-local kind of reality. We open our eyes in this world, but it doesn't mean our eyes were first open on this world. I remember reading in one of the Puranas written by Rishi Vyasa from the Vedic tradition, and he was speaking about a man who had completed 7,500 apocalypses of incarnations. So imagine how many lifetimes of incarnation there could potentially be till the day of an apocalypse comes. So this dude had been an eternal being who had gone through 7,500 apocalypses. And I thought that is countless repetitions of the same moment. And so I kind of realized it's as if when you kind of take into consideration certain ancient metaphysical frameworks, you access a certain evolutionary abilities. It's as if your ancestors did something and you were born and you never attempted that thing your ancestors did until one day you did, and eventually you realized the skill you held. That each DNA harbors ability, a unique vision, a contribution to the living world. Let me tell you, these are all like, if we wanted to check the health of our civilization, Mr. Within would say, it's not that our civilization is unhealthy, it is misdirected. It's like life gave you eyes, but you're choosing to only look at one thing. That's what a belief is. A belief is a box over your head because it's easier to put a box over your head than actually confront the truths of a cruel world. A world that can be purely isolated. There's moments I've walked on in this life that it has been pure isolation. It's as if whether there were people around me or not, I notice this kind of secret vision and relationship I'm having with the cosmos that the world can never know. Because it is in some sense the context behind my eyes, which I as a concept don't have access to. So there's some things that as much as I've tried, trust me, in these talks, I've tried to kind of reach the top of that shelf, but literally my fingers can't reach it because we are still creatures using the technology of language. And so there are certain limits, of course, when you see something and you apply a certain tool. Let's say you're a person of a certain caliber and understanding, and so you read something or you see something, okay? And so that thing that you're seeing, you first use everything that you know as a tool to figure out, and your first impression gives you a sort of feedback. And if by your first impression you cannot solve the phenomena, that means your consciousness has not seen something that is there. The whole point of the problem is that there's a solution to it. And the whole purpose of the solution is that there's a hidden potential, there's a hidden dimension. You see, it's like, why do you have hope in emptiness? Because there is a potential for something to be filled. There's the story of this kind of scientist. I mean, this is I think everybody knows this story, but it's this scientist who goes to see this Zen monk, and I forget the name of the Zen monk, but he goes to see the Zen monk, and he's asking like deep questions, and the Zen monk, in response to the man's kind of bewildered curiosity, the scientist's bewildered curiosity, starts pouring tea into his cup, but doesn't let go, and so the teacup is overflowing and spilling onto the kind of bowl underneath it or whatever. And so suddenly in that instant, the scientist is like, why are you doing that? Stop it, you know, the cup is full. And the Zen master looks at this guy and he's like, yeah, it is. And so what he means is that it's like there's this notion that you absorb a certain amount based on your energy levels. Like you can say that understanding something or paying attention to something takes a certain amount of energy if you want to do it consciously. So to live consciously in this life requires a sort of unique energetic position. Now, if you are choosing to express yourself throughout the day as an animate creature, and that takes a sort of energy, that energy has to literally transform into value. And the whole thing about the social program, the economical program, pretty much how our world is designed with various systems influencing it. For some reason, I don't know why, but I feel I should intersect this moment with a story from Christianity, you know. And so there's the story of Thomas the Doubter. And Thomas the Doubter is a very interesting story, and it's the story of this man who, it's as if one of the close people around Christ. And so it's as if suddenly Christ appears and Thomas misses Christ. He's like out of the room when Christ appears. And he comes back and they say the master was here, Christ was here in the room. And so Thomas says, I won't believe it unless I could put my hand on the wound. You see, it's as if I cannot believe the truth until I directly experience it. And so what happens is eventually a moment comes where Thomas is in the room and Christ appears. And out of everybody that was there, Christ only asks Thomas to step forth and to in some sense touch the wound of Christ, to see that Christ is real. And Thomas goes and does that, and of course I believe in Christian theology, this is fairly kind of acknowledged, that in some sense Thomas the Doubter was the only one who got to touch the resurrected body of Christ. Okay, and so there's a profound narrative power to the archetypes found in this story, because we are characters, we relate to other characters whether we like it or not. Whether you see someone who's better than you and worse than you, you have to at some point realize it is your values being painted on their face, like as if your experiences are creating a mask which you're putting on people's face and you think you know them. But who they are eyes that are endless. You see? One can say that 90% of genius is direction and effort. And 10% it's just the hand you're given in this poker game of various galaxies, you know, playing their cards. We used to hunt and gather through our history. and pretty much man would hunt. Now we're no longer hunting for wildlife, for animals and food. We're hunting for ways that we want reality to happen in the future. And that sort of hunting is so abstract that eventually if the environment's will is greater than your will, you're a slave to your environment, simply said. If you feel the weight of the world is on your shoulder, well, guess what? You're gonna have shoulder pain. I find creative attempts at trying to make the unconscious conscious are the greatest way that civilizations can advance. There's usually two power sources for how a civilization can advance. One of them has to do with disharmony and the breaking and destruction of phenomena. The other has to do with the creation of phenomena. So one part of the human mind, or the mind of humanity, is in some sense considering society should constantly, 50% of society should be creating things. And in some sense, 50% of society should be destroying things. And so what that means is we build society in a yin-yang way because our psychologies function in a yin-yang way. What that means is we have kind of like a, of course these are just, we're kind of flying through the storms of the brain right now, but we're brainstorming pretty much. How much of life is being painted into meaning? It's fascinating. Human beings, because they're an energetic expression, this energetic expression, to have value, at least to the personal self, has to have a certain result. That means the reason we say hard work brings you a certain something, because in hard work, the work is so hard you don't have time to be unauthentic. So the karma of the moment is sincere. I didn't understand this when I was younger, but the moments that I was not sincere, or I was ideologically possessed as a child, were moments where I was only seeing through my eyes. And the wisdom of man is that we must look through the eyes of mankind now. Every generation, every civilization, it has its own response, its own reaction. It's as if, again, like that grand cosmic poker game, where it's like the hands that the civilization is given. The ancient Greeks were given a certain hand, the ancient Egyptians were given a certain hand for their civilization. What I mean is that the cards that they held were in some sense the values they considered to be the ultimatum for the human being. The human being finds itself as a creature in a world. Pretty much video game psychology becomes valid here, because the character has to respond to its environment, and the environment has to respond to the character, and eventually the act of life is the integration with the natural world. You cannot deny it. It's like the moment you move on the surface of the earth, you are in motion alongside many, in conscious motion alongside the phenomena of the universal sector. I remember in 2014 when I started to give these talks, a very profound natural experience happened. I'm just sitting on a bench giving like one of these Mr.Within talks, and this bird flies in front of me, like literally, maybe like I don't know, 20 centimeters away from my face, And so I see the wings, I see the back of this bird's wings as it's kind of floating right in front of my eyes, and up close. And it was, for some reason, I felt I was like, there was a kind of divine moment, because it was like I was seeing the engineering of nature. There's different ways that Emotion can arise. This is a very important point I gotta make, I guess, because it's a mystery for many. It wasn't easy for me to find, but eventually you have to make up your own mind about it. But it's pretty much how a certain thought can bring forth an emotion, and pretty much your emotional intelligence is reflecting on how your actual attention is moving. So the movement of attention is suggesting what sort of data is accessible. Now the thing with consciousness is, even though throughout the day we say we're conscious beings, but we are conscious in different ways. Sometimes we're conscious fully in the physical body. That moment you're late for work and you're running, you know. So attention to thought frees emotion from the limits of thought. We are passengers of universal law. I'm going to share something uncommon. I've written a science fiction novel where a chapter of it has this title, The Andromedan Pilot, and it's kind of set in this kind of like context where there's this kind of, how can I tell you, there's this ship in space from the Andromedan galaxy, which is the most enlightened, kind of considered actually enlightened civilization. And so this kind of crew, where there's this kind of Andromedan pilot and his crew, their ship gets attacked by this Darkon fleet, and the Darkon is like the enemy. They're like these kind of, anyways, they're the bad guys. And so the bad guys have this machine, the weapon that destroys the soul. And so if the person doesn't leave their body instantly, like go out of body instantly, the person's soul is going to be vanish. It's going to be erased. And the story of the Andromedan pilot is like, he's one of those kind of, he's the only person out of his crew that goes out of his body in time before the weapon hits. And what happens is he ends up incarnating on Earth, but he incarnates with his memories all intact. So he has all his memories of what happened to him, as if he's forgotten nothing, but he's just stuck in a human incarnation, and he doesn't know how to go back. Okay, and so this idea of the Andromedan pilot, the reason I'm sharing it is because it is about the relationship of various dimensions of limitless qualities and limited qualities. Literally, certain moments, they activate you. You can say when two people are in love, their minds are actually free in the presence of one another. Jonathan Swift has this quote where he says, vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others. And when you really look at that, you kind of realize you're by nature an artist, because your inner realities, your imaginations, and your memory, they are kind of like what you see that is invisible to others. And so that is the profoundness of inner vision, that if it is not externally communicated, it will pass on. You see? So you have to act upon certain ideas, or that idea, or that way your state of consciousness is in that moment. It kind of changes. So the question becomes, in what state of being you want to do what, Because psychology changes, the personality of the person changes in accordance to the environment. That means if the environment changed, you literally had to react to it in a different way to survive. So it means the instant ability to change the person, the sense of personhood in accordance to the environment. So we can never speak about one another as human beings as just one-dimensional creatures where one idea defines who the person is. The person is actually a witness of an interior landscape, a sort of subjective language, orchestrated language, landscape. Right? So the linguistic landscape is seen behind the eyes of the individual. Now the individual is acting upon within the linguistic language. So what I mean by that is that when we see a person like at the market kind of selling us something, that person, what's going on there is that they are in some sense a sort of internal story of life is happening for them, and based on the type of character they are in that story of life, they have considered what the value of the world is, and they're acting in accordance to that. So what that means is pretty much when I walk on this, when I go to the store or whatever, when I see people, I see programs. To be honest, like that dude from the Matrix, I see code. Because literally, if you listen, like, people's minds originate conception. It's strange. It's like the world is dying to live. In the process of a temporary physical experience, we wonder about the continuity of existential reality. If we entertain René Descartes' notion of the dualism of the mind and body, it means that we should not fear death because the mind had nothing to do with the body. The body had everything to do with the mind, but the mind did not have anything to do with the body. So we can say it's like kind of at the moment of death, one can say, or the transition. In that moment, it's as if you're jumping off the boat of the physical body. Literally, your attention is leaving the association with elemental being. It's as if for the first time you say goodbye to the atomic. However, we can never know because the mind is oscillating between the singular and the multidimensional. So it's like whatever view we have, eventually after we see it singular, we wonder about the multidimensional. If we see the multidimensional first, we wonder about the singular. Ancient civilizations had access to the singular, therefore their kind of imagination was more in line with nature. But we right now, the children of the modern generations, they're being born in a multidimensional context. What that means is the progress of the human being is just what it has done with the designs of nature, how it has redesigned phenomena in its own eyes. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. And I'll say this one story before I end off, actually. This merchant back in the day, like traveling from one town, across a desert to another town with his caravan. This merchant enters the town and he's like everyone's getting refreshed, his whole crew and whatnot, and so he goes and speaks to the townspeople, and gets to know everybody instantly and see what everybody wants and whatnot. And so in that moment, suddenly one person who he does a deal with, the guy says you should go meet this enlightened guy who's like his house is at the end of that road, and he's like it makes sense you go see that guy. He's unique, like he's realized or something. He has the pearl, as they said in like Sufi traditions. So anyways, this businessman goes and he suddenly sees the house is like the poorest house, the kind of most broken down house of the whole neighborhood. Okay, the man knocks. The door opens and he sees this kind of man in this Sufi garb, and so he in that instant the Sufi man, it's like the sage kind of welcomes him. He's like, welcome, please come inside for tea. And so he sets up tea, and as they're drinking tea, to start conversation, the businessman says, of course he's a businessman, he's trying to find leads, So he says to the Sufi sage, he says, my dear sage, dear Sufi, dear dervish, he says, dear friend, where's your furniture? Why do you have so little furniture? And he sees only the guy has a mat, he has a lamp, and he has tea. And in that moment, when the merchant asks him, where is your furniture? Suddenly the sage gets intense, and it's as if with a kind of divine authority of the moment, he shouts at the guy and he says, where's your furniture? Where's your furniture? And in that moment, the merchant's like, yo, did this guy just ask me where's my furniture? And he looks at him and he's like, hey man, I'm a traveler here. I'm traveling from here. That's why I don't have furniture. And so the sage smiles, and the dervish smiles and looks at him and says, me too. I am a traveler through manifestation as the eternal. You see it, so one way of interpreting survival is that you're actually traveling. It's a journey, Survival makes it too mechanical, so it becomes pointless. We're like, what the fuck? Are we meant to survive forever? And so we see that it's like nature. Nature is a show that we want to hold on to as much as we can, because it gives us the ability to be actors in an intelligent world. That is what, to be honest, evolution is leading for. It astonished me when I connected the dots, that the purpose of matter was to become a thought. And the purpose of a thought was to become a mirror for that which was never a thought and never matter. The witness. The witness within. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste. An Odyssey of Aeons. The resolution of one moment.